Successful leaders understand how they impact emotional systems. Now, all of us who have been in a church understand that the church is just one big emotional system. And the more people in the church, the more complex the emotional system. If you've ever been in a church business meeting, we all know that there are those handful of people that it doesn't matter what the data says, they're responding emotionally. They're basically responding out of how they feel. And so we as leaders have got to be able to negotiate all of these emotional systems. We've got to be able to respond. So when we're in a time of crisis, when the emotional system is one of crisis, we need to understand that crisis shatters belief and it threatens people's sense of security and exposes their vulnerabilities. So how do we respond? We respond with calmness. We reframe the event with patience and hope. We offer a challenge. Another emotional system is bewilderment. I remember a story about Daniel Boone, who was an early American pioneer, frontiersman, who negotiated the way through the Appalachian Mountains, the Appalachian Trail. Someone asked Daniel Boone one time, in all of your travels and in all of your wanderings, have you ever been lost? And Boone scratched his head and he thought for a few moments and he said, no, I've never been lost, but I've been a mite bewildered for a few days. Well, I think that's where a lot of people are. We have a sense of where we should be going, but we just don't know how to get there. And many people have this sense of bewilderness in this time of uproar. Well, if we understand how we're going to impact the emotional system, that means that as leaders, we've got to offer focus. We've got to stay focused. Even in the fog of the liminal space, we've got to have a sense that we're following direction. Leaders offer vision and opportunities. An emotional system can be stagnancy. Stagnant systems resist change until it becomes absolutely necessary. A lot of our churches are stagnant. A lot of our families are stagnant. A lot of our communities are stagnant. We know things aren't good. We know we're not healthy, but we're just not willing to make the changes necessary to be better. Well, what does a leader do? A leader in the midst of the emotional system of stagnancy offers challenges. Leaders challenge the status quo at a rate people can absorb. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a young promising pastor move into a church that was stagnant. The pastor knew the church was stagnant. Church knew the church was stagnant. So the pastor spends 12 to 18 months instituting change. And instead of the church growing and prospering, the church collapsed and the pastor's tenure ends in failure in about 24 or 30 months. Why? Because he moved too fast. He was implementing challenge. He was implementing change, but he didn't do it at a rate the people could absorb. We've got to understand that the emotional system that we're trying to negotiate is a highly anxious emotional system. Our efforts at change raise the anxieties of the system, and it's a system in which people have a low toleration for change, a low toleration for pain. And so instead of the change bringing new life and reacting against the stagnancy of the church, the leadership, because it moved too quickly, ended up being more toxic than helpful. New situations cause a lot of anxiety in systems, in churches, in families. If you've got a family of 4 and suddenly you get a brand new baby, that new baby makes it a family of 5, and that new baby makes the systems of that family change in every way. You have new families come into a church, especially if they're new families that are not of the same ethnicity or of a different background. It provokes a change in situations and it provokes anxiety. New situations always provoke anxious responses. I remember having a conversation with a young pastor several years ago. He was pastoring his first church. He had gone through the ministerial internship program with me. And so he called me. He said, Brother Dan, I need some counsel. I said, okay. So he began to tell me how a Sunday school teacher, a Sunday school superintendent had resigned. Clerk was threatening to quit. People weren't coming to church. And he was just going through this litany of problems. And so I stopped him and I asked him a question. I said, do you remember when we talked about anxiety-provoking events in MIP? And he said, yes, I do. I said, do you remember what I said about pastoral transitions? And he said, what did you say? I said, every time a church goes through a pastoral transition, the new pastor is the source of anxiety. And all of a sudden he said, wow, they're not the problem. I'm the problem. My very presence is causing anxiety for this church. New situations, new transitions provoke anxious responses. So when we're the new pastor, when we're the leader who is the cause of anxious response, we need to frame change. We need to frame the transition within the mission of the church. We need, as that leader, that change leader who is in a new situation, to demonstrate continuity with who the church has been in the past and demonstrate how their mission and vision for their community can move them forward. So we've got to learn how to impact emotional systems. In times of crisis, we're going to be calm. In times of bewilderment, we're going to offer focus. In systems that are stagnant, we're going to challenge those stagnant systems. And when we find ourselves with the anxiety of new situations, we're going to help negotiate the change within the mission of the church.